Rather than take this week off because of the holiday, I decided we will just do a look back of 50 DIY projects we've done recently in the Thrift Store Challenge series, but the first 6 projects are projects you guys have not yet seen. In this video, I'll share so many different hacks and techniques to make over pieces that are secondhand or even free, and maybe even ways that you could repurpose items that you would otherwise donate. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. For the first new project in this video is to make a leather kind of director style chair. These chairs at high-end stores can oftentimes be very expensive. Even from places like Pottery Barn, a set of 2 of these can be thousands of dollars. And while that's even out of my budget, what I really love are the vintage style director chairs. This set of Ralph Lauren director chairs that are leather sold for $7,000. While I might not have $7,000 to spend on 2 chairs, I definitely have $7 to spend on remaking this chair here, which is exactly how much this chair was. This chair was just $7 at my local thrift shop. After cleaning it, the first thing I did was just remove the particle board seating and the backing part, which were just connected with screws. So I just used my flathead screwdriver to remove those so I could slide those pieces out. After giving the chair a scuff sand on the remaining pieces, I then made a custom stain, which is just basically a half and half mixture of Tismith gray and antiquing wax that I can link in the description box down below for you guys. Applying that all over with a foam brush. Once that dried, went over with a fine bristle brush of just the antiquing wax to kind of give a faux grain effect. To reupholster the remaining pieces of this chair, usually I don't get lucky and find leather or even imitation leather at the fabric section in my thrift store, but this time I did, and it was just $1.25. If you don't get lucky, I've suggested in the past to look at your handbag section, your coat section of your thrift store. You could usually find at least imitation leather in those sections of your thrift stores. Cutting the fabric down to the appropriate sizes based on what was left. So for the bottom section, I just left the particle board intact to the chair so that way the seating would be nice and sturdy. Just did so using my staple gun. In order to attach the seat back to the bottom of the chair, I needed to, I guess, deepen the screws that were already there in the chair so that way I would know where to drill in, but instead of drilling it from the top this time, I would be drilling it in from the bottom of the chair to connect the 2 pieces together. So for just around the $10 price point, I think I have a beautiful addition to my space that was so cost effective because I shopped secondhand. I think every high-end store right now has some sort of a version of a plaster side table, and these can be quite costly if you shop retail. So the last time I was at the Goodwill bins, I found this, I'm assuming was a table base. The tabletop was not included. So it was very heavy, but here's the benefit about shopping at the bins, because everything is weighed by the pound and anything over 10 pounds is then half off. So this base actually only cost me just a little over $3, which I thought was a very fair price point considering how heavy duty it was. After cleaning it up, I then went in with a combination of joint compound as well as some exterior storm paint that I just applied with a large foam brush. Because I wanted the flexibility of being able to move this table outside if I need to, I did want to use an exterior paint that can literally weather the storm. Now for the top of the table, I went this route for this table just because it already had a lot of texture. This stone round, concrete round came from a store called Menards. I'm not sure if they're nationwide, but you can usually find stone rounds like this at really any hardware store or any kind of garden center. And if you wanted to mix it up with the materials, you could go to Home Goods and grab a marble round there, or even go to your craft store, grab a wood round and stain it. I think that would be very pretty as well. But the point is, shopping secondhand, you can get high quality pieces that just need a little tweak or two, and then you can customize it to whatever you want. One thing I've really been wanting to add to my space in my living room is just a neutral colored lounge chair. And these can be super expensive at West Elm, at Crate and Barrel. And as much as I love shopping secondhand, nothing is better than a free find. So I found this chair on Facebook Marketplace for free, and it was just 10 minutes from my house. Of course, we were going to need to reupholster it, but otherwise the structure of the chair was really nice. I know oftentimes a lot of people just like to kind of reupholster on top of what's already upholstered. And I personally like to take whatever is off of the chair that's already on there for a couple reasons. Obviously, the first reason is from like a cleanliness perspective, but then also once you undo something, it makes it a lot easier to know how you need to redo it. So by taking all of the fabric off, I was able to kind of see how it was applied and where pieces connected together. So that way when I apply my fabric, I know exactly where things need to go. The only time I'd actually really remove the foam is if I felt like it just had like a weird smell to it, or if there was a weird stain on there. That would be the only time I'd probably remove that as well. Obviously, just want to remove the legs so I can get a nice clean finish when I go to reupholster with my own fabric. To remove all of the fabric, I usually just like to use some needle nose pliers and just kind of pinch the fabric and then roll it out. And usually that helps kind of lift the existing staples, and then that way I can just remove those with those same needle nose pliers. For the fabric, I knew I was going to need a lot of fabric because not only did I need to be able to reupholster the actual chair, but there was also a pillow. So I needed a ton of fabric, and the cheapest way I have found to get a lot of great quality fabric is to use a really just long and wide curtain panel. So this one was 95 inches long and it was only $2. Started off by just removing the grommet section there. That just would be what we would use to kind of put it on a curtain rod, because we won't be needing that. But I'm trying to preserve as much of the fabric as possible because for this specific chair, I just had enough. I had very little fabric left over after I reupholstered this chair. Started out by then just laying all of the fabric down, and this was basically what was left after I was able to cover the back and the front and the sides. So I just kind of tucked it in there to make sure I was going to have enough. I used some Gorilla Glue spray adhesive first, ironed that in place just so it was nice and flat, waited for that to kind of cure a little bit before then getting to the corners. For the corners of the chair, this is always what seems to take me the longest whenever I'm reupholstering anything, is just because you want to have the most kind of seamless finish that can possibly be there. And this is just one of those things that's just trial and error. You just want to make sure that you're taking your time with this step. And then for the back, I just chose to use sections that were kind of already, I guess, hemmed. So that way it just looked like it was hemmed onto the chair itself. I ended up just hand sewing those sections in so that way they would stay nice and put, and then I just simply reattached the legs, sewed in the pillow with the remaining fabric, and this was the end result. Now, of course, it's not perfect, but again, for just $2 for this entire project, I think that it makes a beautiful addition to my living room space, and it was so cost effective because I shopped secondhand. Moving along now into lanterns. So if you're looking for a set of lanterns, like the same style of lantern, but just in maybe a few different sizes, Pottery Barn is very expensive, and you can find really similar things honestly at Home Goods or at TJ Maxx, Ross. So I would go that route. Usually what you're gonna find at the thrift store are these kind of just random one-off lanterns, and I've avoided buying these now because what I find is usually they're really hard to style. So what I've been doing instead is finding something that I can either turn into a lantern to give it a little bit of height. So I found this plant stand here, as well as this aluminum waste bin. I first just needed to start off by tightening the screw there because it was a bit loose. And then for the waste bin, I removed the rubber sections that were on the top and the bottom just to make it look more like a lantern. Because this is metal, I like to go in with the self-etching primer because it bonds to metal and aluminum, creates a nice primer, nice barrier before you add your spray paint on top of it. I've used this in my bathroom for the handles and my faucet, and it still has held up very well. It's been several months and it still looks like the day that I painted them. Generally, I just like to give a few coats before then going in with whatever kind of paint I like. For this specific project, I wanted to keep it all really nice and neutral, and I just decided to use a flat black spray paint. For the candle part, I was really happy to find these because these are from Luminera and they're the flickering type of candle, and these from Pottery Barn can be very expensive. So I grabbed both of them that I found. Because I found all of the pieces at the Goodwill bins, and again, everything is weighed by the pound, this project cost me less than $5, and I think it looks beautiful in my space. One thing you guys ask me sometimes is what would I define my design style is in my space? And I think that I definitely love a modern kind of look, but I need to have that kind of rusticity, that antique, those primitive pieces, because I feel like that those pieces are really what tell a story, and they make your space feel really lived in and add just a kind of generational warmth to your space. So generally for these pieces, I like to go to antique shops. I feel like I find kind of more what I'm looking for than really at the bins or at any thrift store. So usually though, they are a little bit more expensive, but this dough bowl was just $15, and I thought that that was a pretty fair price point considering I was going to have to take my time to remove all of this like rose gold spray paint someone had applied. So sanding the piece wasn't really working out, and I say it wasn't working out because it was kind of the heat from my sander was creating almost like a glue of the spray paint mix. So generally when that happens, I like to just use citrus strip, cover it with some sort of cling wrap or saran wrap just to make sure that everything is sticking together really well. I generally like to leave it on for like 30 minutes to an hour, and then I will take my scraping tool and I'll just scrape off the excess. This is kind of a messy project, so I like to lay things down like newspapers around, because once you start scraping everything off, it's just kind of like a little gunky. But then after scraping everything off and then washing the remaining off, I just then let it dry outside. Did a color wash with just, again, kind of what we used for the chair in the first project, but watered down, and added some black paint just to kind of give, again, a more primitive look. And this was the end result. Another thing to consider when you're out thrifting, if you find a piece that maybe isn't exactly what you're looking for. So for example, I found this tiered hanging basket that I think is usually used in pantries so you can store different fruits and vegetables. I didn't have a use for that. I have just a small little pantry, like a bifold pantry, but I was wanting a tiered chandelier for my bathroom. So it's the same material. I have 3 baskets. I have even a hanging piece to go with it. So just try to think of those things in your mind when you're out thrifting. What could you make it into? Do you have the materials to make it into that piece? And usually you can come up with some pretty cool and unique ideas. The only problem with these baskets really was, and this happens all the time to baskets at the thrift store, they just get so warped from being just kind of thrown and tossed around. So one way you can just revive them is just to stick them with some warm water with some baking soda. And then once they're totally soaked, I like to just fill them with like old rags or like an old towel just to kind of shape them back to the way I want them to be shaped. And then I let them dry outside. So in order to make this a hanging ceiling light fixture, I needed to remove sections from all of the bottoms of the baskets, and I just needed to make sure I was taking enough out that they could just fit in there nice and snug. So these are the light bulbs I'm using. They are not hardwired light bulbs. These are just rechargeable ones to make it nice and easy. I didn't have electricity that went to the ceiling that I'm going to be putting this on already. So this is a nice solution. Nothing is actually hardwired, although it looks like it is. Now to attach each basket to each other, I'm just going to follow where the braided pieces that connected them initially was and attach those at all kind of the same points, but just making sure to tier them every section I go down. So I cut 3 sections out about the same length, and I just twisted them around at the same point of each of the baskets. Because this is going to be going into the ceiling, I needed a kind of like, I guess, ceiling cap to kind of cover the cord. And I just found one of these at my local thrift shop for a couple bucks. And I'm just going to attach that kind of bracket piece to the ceiling and then connect all of those pieces together. Because these baskets are so lightweight and I found them at the Goodwill bins, this project cost me less than a couple dollars, and I think it adds just a nice kind of Tulum vacation vibe to my bathroom space, but was done so affordably. One thing that I really love from this latest drop from the Our House collection are these indoor-outdoor kind of multifunctional pieces of small scale furniture. So I really love these little tables that you can kind of fold up, and the ones at HomeGoods were still a little bit more than I wanted to spend. So at the Goodwill, I found this wood tray here for just $6, as well as this little tray side table that folds up that was just $2 at the Hartville thrift shop. Started off by just taking my shop vac and cleaning it really well, and just kind of taking apart this bottom piece so then that way I can attach it to the wooden tray. I used the old top piece of that table as a guide to know where I was going to need to screw these brackets into this wooden tray. I secured one of the sides down first before adding the part that kind of makes it retractable, and then securing all of the other screws in place, making sure that they were nice and level. Before painting it, I just wanted to make sure that it was functioning kind of how I thought it was going to, and that it wouldn't be too top heavy, and thankfully it wasn't. It folded up very well. And then for paint, I just wanted to keep it nice and modern, so I went in with some satin spray paint. I did 4 coats total just because of all of the pleats on that top section there. Another kind of detail thing, I wanted to kind of make it feel more like a bar cart, so I added these caster wheels, and that really wraps it up for this one. I like that this is something that I can use year round, and I can fold it up when it's not actually in use, but that if I need it, I have it readily available. Moving along now into console tables or entryway tables. So many beautiful options at Our House. I love the black stain on them, but again, just a little over budget for me. Jumping over now to my mom's space. So for her entryway section, I told her that her mirror either needs to be smaller or her table needs to be bigger. So I've kind of been keeping my eyes out for both. And over the last month, I came across 2 kind of credenza sideboard tables that I thought would work well in her space without having to change the mirror. I ended up finding this one here, and it was just $18. The only kind of, I guess, like problem with it was this bottom shelf here was very warped. So I looked up a couple hacks trying to see if I could figure something out. Some people said that you can soak, if it's wood, you can soak it and then kind of place something heavy on either side to kind of unwarp it. So after I tried to kind of unwarp this piece here, it was obviously not successful because it is still very warped. So I had this in my stash here, and what we're gonna do is basically just take some measurements from here, apply it to this board, and basically just like redo the whole thing. However, I understand like not everybody has a circular saw and the ability to kind of do these things. So if you find a piece of furniture that just one piece is warped, you can just omit that piece, and that entryway table could just basically stand on its own. It doesn't necessarily need a shelf. For my mom's space, I wanted it to have one, so that is why we are doing it this way. Before staining or painting it, I just wanted to make sure that it was fitting in that slot well, gave it a good sand, and I actually really liked that it was already like a black stained piece of furniture, so I kind of just kept on with that. Used this black gel stain by Minwax, and then for the top, there was just a couple issues. There was like some watermarks from like cups and things like that. So I just basically gave it a scuff sand, wiped off the sand dust, and then gave it 1 coat of gel stain to the top there as well. Added and secured the shelf down to the bottom, then sealed it with some polyacrylic, changed up the hardware so it fits my mom's space a little bit better. Because I had the gel stain and the plywood and all of the other supplies besides the hardware, I did buy that new from Lowe's, and that was $7. So $25 total for a new entryway table is a pretty good price point. Now for the styling of this table. Let's talk about ceramics and vases. When you're in Our House, everything feels very collected and artisanal almost. I think that they source from a lot of different artists around the world. So the key here is really like a collected feeling, right? So don't even look at the price, just add it to the cart and just make like a dream shopping cart. And then when you go to the Goodwill bins or you go to whatever thrift store you like to go to, and you can have a really like clear idea of things that you're looking for. I am a lover of brass and gold. I loved this vase here. It was $15 at the Goodwill, which is more than I'm usually willing to spend, but it was tagged for originally $95. It was super heavy, felt like it was very good quality. Another thing to kind of keep in mind too is if you're short on budget and space, making sure that the items that you're choosing can either be repurposed in different ways or that they're strong enough to stand on their own. Of course, I love a fishbowl vase for florals. I put tulips in here for Easter and it was beautiful. But then let's say I'm hosting something and I want to use this for some sort of champagne situation, fill it with ice, pop the champagne in there, and it makes for a really beautiful moment. Another thing I loved was this shell planter, but $179 on sale is just a little steep for something that is more seasonal. So when I found this at the Goodwill bins, it was originally from Kirkland's. Of course, you can use this as a planter, but you can also just use it as like a catch-all bowl during the summer months and it would still be really beautiful. Finding sculptural ceramics like these are really great because again, they can stand on their own, but you can also fill them with plants or florals to make an even bigger impact. Now bringing all of our thrifted pieces together for a very collected kind of feel, and all of these pieces I think complement each other very well, but it was done so on such a tight budget. Moving along now into lighting. Again, like the artwork, it's just like weirdly expensive. There's not a lamp on here, like a table lamp on here, I don't think for less than $100, but they are so beautiful. They are so beautiful. So I like to look to them for inspiration, but then even going the Target route, still kind of more than I want to spend, which of course then brings us to the thrift store. So if you're comparing like a hearth and hand lamp that is brass to this one here that was just $8, I personally would just go the $8 route because I think you get an overall really similar look. And I think when you're thrifting for lamps, it's just all about shape. So if the color's not right, that's an easy adjustment. But if you find something that's the right shape and just needs like a modification or two, I always think it's worth a try. I found this blue shade with this swoop detail, just like the one from Magnolia, but instead of the blue shade, I wanted to use this previously thrifted bowl from the Goodwill. I found it for $1.50, drilled a hole through the bottom, so then that way I would be able to attach the two pieces together, and then taking some needle nose pliers, I just needed to widen that hole because it still wasn't quite wide enough, grabbing the pieces from the old shade and just connecting all of the new pieces together. I think I get an overall pretty similar look. It's not identical, of course, but I think you get an overall similar effect, but this lamp was just $5.50. Anthropologie is one of those stores or websites that no matter what your interior design style is, you will definitely find something that you love, but it does come at a pretty hefty price tag. One important note I wanted to make sure that I pointed out in this video is that no matter what the artwork is, it almost always is framed out in some way. So find some artwork that you really like and just consider adding some sort of a floating frame around it, or any just kind of frame in general. I had scrap wood trim in my stash, and I'm just going to take some measurements, take it out to my miter saw and cut it down. If you don't have a miter saw, you can always just use a miter box. You can do straight cuts like I'm showing here, or also do 45-degree angle cuts, which does make it look a little bit more high end, but for the sake of time, I thought this was just the easiest route to go down. There was a little imperfection there at the bottom of this artwork, so I just took some watered down black acrylic paint and just kind of buffed it out. To attach the frame to the wall art, I do like to first use some wood glue just to kind of get it to start holding in place, and then I secure it down with my nail gun. Then you'll want to fill those holes with wood filler and then sand those down, and then pick whatever stain you like. I went in with this one called Coffee. It is a gel stain by Minwax. And that really wrapped it up for this project. I think it's just a really easy way to make something look a little bit more elevated, but on a budget. Moving right along now into some textile options. So Studio McGee always does such a great job because I think she has a lot of love for vintage textiles, and that really shows through even with the Target line. I think they do a really good job of their textiles specifically. Patterns you can expect to see through this line are of course plaid, a lot of linear fabric, and then of course a vintage kind of floral as well. But I still think that you can find really great pieces at the thrift store, and of course they're just gonna be so much more affordable. I find Threshold pillows, I find Studio McGee pillows all the time at my Goodwills, at my thrift store. Most recently, I found this one here at the Hartville thrift shop, and it was just $3, and it had a zipper, so I was able to wash it really well. I'm not totally sure which collection this specific pillow was part of, but I'm so happy I was able to thrift it because it was a major savings, and I think it's a good kind of year-round staple textile. Another textile I found at the Goodwill bins was this pillow cover, and it reminds me so much of this Our House floor pillow, the pattern does. And I found this chair on Facebook Marketplace for just $5. The shape of this chair reminds me so much of one chair from the McGee & Co. line. Started off by just removing the seat cushion from the chair frame using a flathead screwdriver until it just kind of popped off. Removed the fabric and the cushion that were on this existing kind of base. I then took the chair frame outside, just kind of sanded down some of the areas that were a little scuffed up after putting a little bit of wood filler down, and then wiping the whole thing down with just some totally awesome from Dollar Tree, because I actually feel like it's a really good degreaser. Once the chair was totally filled in and cleaned, I then just went in with a black flat primer, and then I went in with some satin black spray paint. For the seat part of the chair, because I had removed the upholstery and the cushion, I just wanted to unify everything and also paint it black as well. So I sanded that part down, and then I again took that satin black paint to the seat part of the chair. Once that part had dried, I just connected the two pieces together. When it comes to the cushion, I wanted to make this pillow cover instead now into a chair cushion. Studio McGee does that a lot with kind of their very basic chairs. They add these just kind of simple patterned chair cushions, and it just totally, for me, changes the look of the chair. Taking my sewing scissors, I'm just going to remove a few stitches from each of the corners so I can feed the straps through my existing chair cover, so that way it can just wrap around the back end of the chair. And one kind of vignette you'll see a lot from the Studio McGee line is you'll oftentimes see just kind of a one-off chair with a couple pieces of some small artwork above it, or even some little plates, and it just creates such a nice little moment there. So I wanted to create something similar in my space, but so much more budget friendly. Now this is where things can get really expensive, and that is the outdoor furniture from Pottery Barn. So these can cost a small fortune, but if you shop secondhand, you can usually find a pretty good deal. So I ended up finding this Plaster coffee table for just $30, and then I got 20% off of that. So under $25 for this really large, round Plaster coffee table, I thought was a very fair price point. There was a little bit of wear and tear to the top, but I knew I would just need to paint it anyway. And the paint that I use is a Storm paint. It's from Lowe's. I actually use this on some of my planters that I keep outside. We don't have a covered patio, so anything that's out there needs to literally be able to weather the storm. And then to style it, one thing I have found is if you just invest your money in one large scale piece instead of buying a bunch of small things like from Dollar Tree, the overall impact just looks more expensive. So this vase from the Goodwill was $17.99, but was over $100 originally from Bed Bath & Beyond. And I think, again, it just adds to the overall high-end look that I'm trying to achieve, but so budget friendly. Let's do an apples to apples comparison. If I were to buy the cabana cushions, a similar blue vase, and the white Plaster coffee table, this would be a small fortune, but because I found, cleaned, and thrifted them, this was such a major savings. Another thing I wanted to add to my outdoor space was a side table that provided me with a little bit of storage. We have a hot tub, so I wanted to create something that I would be able to kind of place all of the chemicals inside of there, and I wanted whatever sat inside to be kind of heavy so that way my kids couldn't lift and get to it. So to start, I found this shallow glass bowl that was really wide and large in scale. So I ended up just spray painting it the same color as the planter that I planned on putting this inside of. Next, I knew I needed to grab some cement or concrete because I wanted to make a really beautiful succulent bowl that would sit inside of our now storage side table planter. The one from Pottery Barn just had a flat top, so you could absolutely go that route and use it for towels or a cooler like they're showing here. So all you really need to start this project is some sort of cylinder planter. The reason I put these L brackets in, I obviously know I can't screw them in from the top, but they're sturdy enough that they can hold this little succulent bowl situation. I'm going to pop that little drainage hole out just in case there's just the slightest gap in between our thrifted bowl that we're going to put the succulents in and this planter that I got from last year. This is from Target. I think it was like $20 some. I've collected several succulents at the bins for several months now, but I also needed to purchase some from Amazon. So I just cut them down first before mixing and adding all of the cement because you don't have that much time to really work once the cement starts to harden. Once that was pretty level, then I just needed to add some painter's tape to keep the succulents in place. I'm just kind of loosely doing it until I'm sure that that's where I want the tape to be. And then once I just kind of secured those down and then filled in all of those slots with different succulents until all of the slots were completely filled out. I let that harden overnight, and then it was just time to combine the two pieces together. When I need to get into my hot tub things, I can do so, and it looks beautiful sitting out on the table as a separate piece of decor. But then when I need them to be unified, when I'm trying to hide the chemicals, it can function that way as well. So this guy was $25, but then I got 20% off. Just needed a really good clean again, so I just cleaned it off and then placed some logs. I actually placed this inside in my bedroom near our fireplace, but let's say we are hosting and we're gonna have a bonfire or a cookout, whatever. I can always just take this downstairs, fill it up with logs, and it's just a beautiful way to display them, but on a budget. But you can also find pieces that just might need some TLC at the thrift store. So for example, some of you might remember when I found this outdoor cooler and it was just $5. When I used Google Lens, this exact cooler, obviously not broken and in perfect condition, was almost $200 through Amazon. And those are the questions you really need to ask yourself at the thrift store. Is it worth the gamble? Because not every project works out, but for $5, I thought it was worth a try to see if I could spruce this piece up a bit. Everything always starts with a good clean, vacuum out any kind of debris or dust, and then you want to make sure that you're just cleaning the piece very well so that way you can really get a grasp on everything that you're going to need to do. I thought I was going to need to paint the top, and turns out it was just very, very dusty. So after I cleaned that really well, cleaned the inside very well, and it was obvious that whoever owned this piece before I did painted it because some of the spray paint had gotten onto the actual cooler. So to start, I'm just going to unscrew the top piece from the actual cooler itself so that way I can spray paint it independently just so I get a nice clean finish. I'm going to use my favorite epoxy spray paint. You guys might remember when I used this on my bathroom sink, and I thought it would be the perfect thing to use for a project like this one because of course a cooler has water and you need whatever paint you use to be water resistant. I gave 3 light coats, waiting about 15 minutes in between each coat, and then I peeled the tape back the next day. For the top cooler piece, it had actually broken off of the lid, so I just needed to reattach those pieces together, and I'm doing so using this maximum strength Gorilla Glue. It bonds to a lot of different surfaces, which is why I like it. And then if some of the glue seeped out, I just took a little wash rag and just removed the excess. And then I just simply screwed those hinges back into place, and this was the end result. I think for $5, because I had all the other supplies already, this was a major savings for this summer season. Now, over time, that epoxy might wear down. I've only used the cooler once, but I drained it and everything looks great as of now. But who's to say by the end of summer that that might not necessarily be the case? So I'll keep you guys posted, but so far so good on this one. For the next kind of outdoor idea, I understand that this isn't going to be for everybody. Some people like to kind of ornament their backyards with spheres or statues of some kind. And I really like these kind of modern globe ones. So we've done so many different projects on this channel with bowling balls, turned them into sphere vases, jumbo sized ornaments, a side table. Truly, the list goes on and on. But for today, we are going to take one of these bowling balls and turn them into one of these kind of stone spheres that you can place in your garden. So to start, I went in with one coat of that stone spray paint. So now that I've kind of gotten like a once over with the stone spray paint, now I'm going to get out my cement and just fill these holes. Leave this one open because that's how it's going to be staked into the ground. Fill these holes and then just kind of like lightly just kind of blot the cement around it, because I can always sand that off later, but I think it's just going to give an overall more like textured appearance. Once the cement had dried, I then just gave it a scuff sand throughout and then went in with one final coat of that stone spray paint. So the bowling ball at the thrift store was just $1, and the stake, I'm just going to use the bottom of a solar light from the Dollar Tree. So under $3, because I had all of the other supplies already, is not a bad price point. And I do like the way that this looks, but I think he needs a buddy, and preferably something that's bigger. So if you guys have any suggestions on something that's heavy duty and sphere shaped that I could use for this project, let me know. Next up is to make a pleated globe light. So from the Dollar Tree, of course, grabbed a hurricane vase. One kind of light shade, or lamp shade rather, you can always find at your thrift stores are globe lights. To wrap around the base of our light, I chose to use this roll top desk lid. I find these all the time at the thrift store. They're usually about $1. You guys have seen me use this in the past. When I flipped my bathroom vanity, I cut out a section of that roll top desk, added it to the kind of inside of my cabinet, painted it, and then added some pretty hardware, and it was a super simple transformation. For this project, all we're gonna do is wrap our hurricane vase around with this same material. So I know a lot of people will recommend pull wrap to you. However, pull wrap is really expensive. So for smaller scale projects, I like to use this material instead, because you get an overall similar look, but it's way more affordable. Taking some quick measurements so I know how much to cut down, I just used my miter saw. I felt like that was the easiest thing to use. With the sections then cut, it's just time now to clean them really well. There was just some residue on the top of this roll top desk, so I just cleaned them up, trimmed them down, again using that same Gorilla Glue to make sure it sticks on really well. Just went all around the perimeter, as well as crossed it with an X on the inside. Now you could totally leave this the color that it is, but I really don't love an orangey wood in my space, so went in with some taupe spray paint, then with some antiquing wax to get a really nice kind of grayish wood tone color. To apply the wax, I like to use a chip brush and just go in nice long strokes, so that way it really does look like wood grain. I then took a champagne flute, flipped it upside down, so that way my light could sit at the top of the hurricane vase, so that way when it is on, it will illuminate from the top and not the inside. Decided to make a little matching vase to go along with it, and that really wrapped it up for this project. Super easy and affordable to make. Moving along now into ceramics, which is always my favorite selection from the Studio McGee line. I think they give you a lot of really great options that look like designer pieces, but at a much more affordable price point. But even at that affordable price point, I still think you can find better pieces that are more unique at the thrift store. But while I'm in Target, I'm paying attention to the colors they're using, the shapes, the sizes. Another ceramic option that I recently found at the Goodwill bins was this really beautiful armed jug vase. Now, the thing about these vases, this guy was just actually $3, a little over $3, because everything is priced by the pound. Now, here's my issue with these vases, because the scale, you think it's great, it's a nice big vase, but these vases are often too big to be styled on a coffee table or on a bookshelf, and they're too small to be floor vases. But what these vases are the perfect size for are entryway tables or plinth tables or above a fireplace. So before I get into DIYing anything, I just want to do a quick check on Google just to make sure I'm not going to DIY over anything that's of any value. First, we're just going to clean the vase off really well before we apply our paint. And because I just wanted this vase to be very neutral, I just went in with this flat khaki camouflage spray paint. I think somewhere along the way, we all thought that we needed to distress and age absolutely every piece of pottery, but sometimes it's just nice to keep it nice and simple. I wanted to pick a color that goes with my space kind of year round, so that way I wouldn't grow tired of it. Just doing several light applications of spray paint until the vase was completely covered. Grabbed some branches from outside, filled a glass with water, and this was the end result. Let's talk about now some of the new marble pieces that were dropped through this latest collection. There was this little marble-based side table, and it was nice, but it just seemed a bit short for my personal liking. Also, there were, certain ceramics painted to look like marble. I'm not crazy about that look either, and a lot of red marble, which I know a lot of people really love. I just don't think it's as timeless as your classic kind of marble colors. In last week's video, I showed you guys these nightstands that I made using porcelain tile to kind of make plinth style marble nightstands. And you guys had a ton of questions about those nightstands. So I've been meaning to make one of these that was a bit larger. So in order to do this, I needed to use a tile that was larger. So I used this large format porcelain tile. I grabbed 5 tiles total, as well as 2 4x4s that were 8 feet long. I had my measurements already when I went to Home Depot, so they were able to cut my 4x4s down, and that way it made it easier to fit in the car. So in order to figure out how much space you're gonna need in between each of these 4x4s, you're going to need to combine the width of the 2 4x4s together and then subtract it from the width of each of your tiles. Whatever that number is what you then need to make your spacers. So taking scrap 4x4, I'm going to measure out 8.75, make my marking there, grab my straight edge, and then I'll take that out to my miter saw and cut that twice. And this is really just to make sure that I'm distancing everything appropriately and everything will stay nice and straight. To attach our 4x4s together, I took some scrap wood and used my nail gun to attach these pieces both at the top and at the bottom of each of the 4x4s. Once those are secure and in place, I just removed my clamp and then went to repeat that process onto the next set of 2 4x4s. So at this point, you should have something that kind of looks like this. These pieces are not yet connected, but we'll connect them the same way that we connected these 2 pieces, with 1 piece here, 1 piece at the bottom, 1 piece there, 1 piece at the bottom. So again, taking my spacers, I'm going to make sure that I have a spacer at the top and at the bottom to connect everything together the same way, using scrap wood and my nail gun until everything is one kind of solid piece. So the structure is done, and now it's just time to add our tiles. So I started this time by adding the tiles all around the sides. To attach each tile to our wooden box frame, I just did so using a Gorilla Glue that's specifically designed to work with tile. So whenever you're choosing an adhesive, just make sure it's compatible with all of the materials used for that project. I then placed each tile on top of the adhesive and then clamped it down for at least 6 hours, but for some of them, I did leave them on overnight. Once all of the sides were on, I was then able to kind of take a look and see how much of the tile I was going to need to cut off, so that way our tile piece can kind of sit inside of the 4 sides. So I just took some measurements, made my markings. I used my straight edge and some clamps to get a nice straight cut with this dry tile saw. Thankfully, it was kind of the perfect fit. Before placing it in there, again, used that same Gorilla Glue adhesive and placed it on top. I just painted the grout using some grout specific paint and then just added a base to the bottom using some scrap trim. I painted that black as well, and this was the end result. Now let's talk about where things can get really expensive, which of course is our furniture options. Through Anthropologie, thousands of dollars on really beautiful furniture, but you can also find really similar pieces at your thrift store. Now the really good furniture pretty much goes almost immediately whenever it hits the floor, but the stuff that requires a little bit of elbow grease or maybe a tweak or two will sit for a little bit, and that then provides an opportunity for an improvement in your space or flip it for a quick buck or two. So I found these bar stools that were originally $5, but then I got 20% off, so they were just $4 a piece. Taking some scrap white linen blend fabric, I'm just going to simply reupholster these. If you are kind of new to reupholstering and you're reupholstering something that is round like these, my best suggestion is after you've kind of cut it down, give yourself a little bit of slack on the perimeter of whatever you're trying to reupholster. But then you kind of want to like pleat the fabric on the underside, so then that way what you see is very smooth around. Also, whenever you're reupholstering anything, I like to just remove it, so then that way I can keep kind of flipping it back and forth to make sure that it's looking the way that I want it to. Once you are happy with the way that it looks, then you just want to remove your excess fabric and then attach the top now to the base of the bar stool. We can stop here and we don't need to add anything necessarily, but because this is an Anthropologie video, of course we need to add a little bit of extra detail. So I had some of this cream fringe left over, so we are just going to add this around the sides of the tops of these bar stools just to, again, give it some detail, but then also I wanted to give it the availability to remove it if you don't like it. So I first went in with this double-sided tape from the Dollar Tree, and then I added the hot glue only to the outside of the tape attaching the fringe. One question I get from you guys often is, what do I do with all of these things that I share with you guys? And usually I either keep it for myself, give it to neighbors or family, but this would be an example of something I would sell. So it cost me under $10 for under 30 minutes and was able to make a $50 profit. So I encourage you guys to get out to your thrift stores, of course, to look for yourself, but if you see an opportunity to make a little bit of extra money, I definitely recommend doing so. Moving along now into the kitchen items. So when it comes to home goods, I think that they do a really good job of keeping the prices fairly low for what you're getting. Even if you can find some of those pieces at the thrift store, it's maybe going to be about half of the price, especially when it comes to like the wood cutting boards and wood bowls. But when it comes to the marble items, I pretty much never find marble pieces that are in good condition at the thrift store. It is very, very rare. And Home Goods keeps the prices really nice and low, and you get a really high quality item. The only thing I would say, maybe just check, because lately Goodwill has been buying pallets, I think, from Home Goods clearance and overflow, and you can oftentimes find the exact same things for about a fifth of the price. So just check first before you purchase to make sure you really are getting the best deal, which I shared an example of that with you guys last week. So with the money that I saved, I decided to add an attachment to the bottom to make it like a Lazy Susan tray. And even with that adjustment, I still was able to save over $10, and I was able to give this tray a little bit more functionality. I found these Travertine tiles for just $2 for the entire box, and you could use these in so many different capacities. On every high-end site, there's always some variation of a Travertine soap dish, a Travertine tray. Also at the thrift store, I found these MDF placemats, and we're not going to use them as placemats. We are instead going to use them as the base for our DIY Travertine tray. So supplies for this project, you'll need 2 MDF placemats, liquid nails, and 12 Travertine tiles. So starting off by just taking some E6000, connecting 2 of the MDF placemats together so that way it could withhold the weight of each Travertine tile so it doesn't start bowing in the middle. I attached each Travertine tile with liquid nails and just kind of adjusted them until I was happy with it. And then to frame it out, I used some corner molding that I had in my stash using my miter saw, cutting at a 45-degree angle. Before securing those down, I wasn't crazy for the color of the molding, so I decided to go in with Tismuth Gray It is a semi-transparent stain that you can apply, and it just gives a kind of whitewashed effect. Then once those dried, I then connected everything together with E6000, taped off the corners until they were solid, and that really wrapped up this project. Let's talk about candles and candle holders. Now, I had no idea what a blushed tonka smelled like, so I'm glad I had the privilege of going to Target to be able to decide that I can find really great smelling candles at the thrift store for so much more affordably. But I do love these candle holders here. There's something that feels very vintage about these here from the McGee & Co line, and then now with this latest drop, it's just an all glass kind of similar version of it. And this is something I see very often, but more specifically in the Goodwill bins or in the Christmas section of your thrift stores. And this guy at the Goodwill bins cost me less than $1, placed a candle inside, and it was a much more affordable option than shopping even through the Target line. Another piece I found was this. Now, I'm not sure exactly what this is, but it does fit a tapered candle pretty perfectly. And I thought, wouldn't that be so cute in like a bathroom? You stick your little hand towel in there and you could pop a candle in there. Like, what a cute moment. But I thought it would be even cuter if we could, instead of a candle, put a little glass vase and use it as a kind of like bud vase wall decor piece. Now, I did try to do the trick of the salt and vinegar to kind of naturally at home patina the brass. It did not work for me. It ended up turning the piece this pink color, so I think I must have missed something when I did this project. So what I decided to do was just combine black paint with some rub and buff in the color Gold Leaf, and I then just applied it with my finger until it was completely covered, and then I dusted it with some green spray paint, just some matte green spray paint to just kind of give that patinaed look. Added my glass vase and floral in there, and this is how it turned out. So I already had the bed, the box spring, and the frame, but I did not have a headboard. So last week I asked you guys your opinion on what you thought I should do to this thrifted headboard. This guy was just $20, and the majority of you said go with the white linen, which I kind of felt was more the vibe for this space as well. And as I was looking at inspiration, whenever I do a mood board, I like to just do some dream shopping, and everything that kept coming up was kind of in this white linen fabric for the headboard, but it was just not in the budget. Even at Target, which was going to be a more affordable option, was still basically the budget of the whole room, but for just the headboard. So that's why I always go the thrifted route, because you can find great things. So I found also from the thrift store this $2 Target curtain panel, and we are just going to use this fabric to reupholster this headboard. So initially I had tried doing it with the fabric adhesive with the kind of blackout piece on the back of the curtain, and it just was not sticking to the actual linen fabric. It was just sticking to the blackout curtain fabric. So I decided to remove that completely and basically just start over. Once that back piece was removed, it then adhered perfectly to the headboard. I just took my fingers to kind of get in those nooks and crannies just to make sure everything was lining up really well and everything was nice and straight. If there was a wrinkle, this fabric adhesive does give you a little bit of time to work with it, which is nice. It doesn't immediately stick. So like here, I had a little wrinkle here, and you just have to keep working with the fabric until all of those wrinkles are kind of ironed out. I also added the fabric adhesive to all along the sides of the perimeter of the headboard, leaving enough excess so that way I could use my staple gun for the back. With the front now secured down, I just flipped the headboard around, and then I always, whenever I'm reupholstering anything, I like to start in a corner and I just twist the fabric as tight as it can get and add my first staple there. Once the stapling was completed, I just removed any excess fabric, and then to attach it to the wall, I just did so using a pack of heavy-duty D-rings. And for right around the $35 price point, I think this is the perfect start to kind of grounding the bedroom space in a really beautiful and organic way. Next up, we're gonna focus on mirrors. This is one of those categories in home decor that is kind of sneakily expensive. All of a sudden, you've spent $200 on a mirror. You could probably find something really similar at the thrift store eventually, or even Facebook Marketplace. So I ended up finding this full-length mirror here. I loved that it was a nice oval shape. I think that's very trendy right now. I also really liked the wood tone of this mirror. It matches this one chair that we have pretty perfectly, and it was just $5. This mirror initially was one of those mirrors that came with like a bottom piece that was kind of like a freestanding mirror, but because it didn't have that, what I just decided to first do was just give it a really good cleaning. There was some paint splattered on there, so I used Goof Off to buff that out. So for the holes that were previously attached to that bottom piece there, I just decided to make them look more intentional by adding kind of a latch quality on either side to kind of close those off, and then of course hang the mirror appropriately with some heavy duty D-rings. The mirror's not actually attached to the wall using these latch hooks, but it looks like they are, and I think that that gives it a more kind of floating high-end appearance. I think the latches were around $10 and the mirror was $5, so $15 for an oval mirror with this sort of detail quality I think is not a bad price point. The next little furniture item I really wanted to have, because this is our guest room, I wanted to add a luggage rack. And these are like weirdly expensive. So when I found this one, I know it's really beat up, but it was from the Goodwill bins and it was just a couple dollars. Started off by just removing any of the ribbon that was still there, and there was a few gashes taken out of it, so I just added some Bondo, sanded that down, and then wiped the whole thing down before just going in with first some black primer and then some black spray paint. I just bungeed the top so that way when I was doing all of my applications of paint, it was kind of upright in the way that it would be in the room. Once the paint had dried, I then took 3 of these belts that I found on the Goodwill retail side, started off by just removing those belt buckles and then also the seam at the end of the belt. Once those sections were removed, I then just folded the belt in half and then made one cut. So I had 6 pieces total of this fabric, but only ended up using 5. Starting off in the middle, taking the piece of fabric, adding some glue to the bottom side of this luggage rack, and then I wanted to flip it upside down just to make sure that that felt like a good width for it to open to. And then from that point, I just kind of worked my way out, adding additional pieces of fabric to either side of that middle piece, just kind of equally distancing them as best as possible. Once the glue was kind of secured down, I would still recommend either using a stronger glue or using the staple gun like I'm showing here, because I think you just want to make sure if a heavy suitcase is sitting on top of this, you don't want like all of the fabric to snap off. So I just wanted to make sure that it was really secure, stapled all of those pieces of fabric down, and this was the end result. Another furniture item I knew I wanted to have in the space, which is because every inspiration picture that I loved had a really like beautiful weathered primitive bench. And if you know anything about these benches, they can be super expensive. So I kept my eyes out for a really long time at antique malls, at antique stores, thrift stores. The only thing I really came across was this bench here. And this bench was $95, but I had some negotiation room because it had been sitting for a while. And the seller kept telling me the reason this piece was valuable was because of this vintage or antique meat grinder attached to it, which was something that I planned on removing anyhow. So the seller advised me to just remove that piece and sell it online if I really only want the bench. So once that piece was removed, it was time to do a little bit of sanding, because obviously where that grinder was, the wood tone underneath of it was now a different wood tone from the rest of the bench. So that, plus there was a few water rings, so I just wanted to kind of unify, not totally sand it down because I still wanted some of that character pulling through, but I wanted kind of a cleaner slate than what it was. Then to kind of, again, bring it back into a more uniform color, I then just went in with some antiquing wax, so that way all of the following color washing applications can all be at the same point. So the first color wash I needed to do was just to kind of remove all of the red tones as much as possible. So I always like to use this stain here. It is called Tinsmith Gray by Minwax. I'm also going to mix some water in there as well as a little bit of antiquing wax. To apply this color wash, I just did so using a foam brush. This is how it looked after one coat, and I could still see too much of the red poking through. Went in again with another coat, and I felt like we were getting somewhere closer to the color that I wanted, which was basically like a darkened or ashen brown color. So now that the red is a lot more neutralized, it's time now to deepen the overall color. So again, we're going to go in with another color wash. This one's much darker. We're going to primarily do antiquing wax, but I do like to add a little bit of black paint to it just to, again, deepen the overall color, and you get this like perfect brown tone that works very well with my floors. And this is the easiest way I have found to really bring antique furniture that is stained in that orangey red tone and bring it into a more modern space. Moving along now into lighting, which is such an important part of any room design. And one material that we really haven't used in this room makeover yet is a woven material. You guys might remember when I found this huge laundry hamper at my local thrift shop for just $5 and decided to just take the lid from that hamper, turning that into our faux ceiling light fixture. So you can do this in any rental. You don't need to hardwire anything, but in order to make it look hardwired, you'll just want to grab a kit off of Amazon, and you'll just want to choose one that has some sort of a plate so it can be anchored into the ceiling. And then for the actual lighting, all you'll need to do is pick out some sort of USB chargeable battery operated light with a remote, so that way it can actually function like a ceiling light would. I think this is a great way to make it look like it's hardwired, but it's totally not, and it draws your eyes up. It lets out light in such a beautiful way, but most importantly was so cost effective. Love this little portable lantern here, but $849 is insane. So at the Hartville thrift shop, I found this much smaller wire lantern for just $2. So there's a lot of different ways you could kind of go with this. So you could add a chain like from the Dollar Tree, pop it in a tree with a solar light, or you could do a candle like they've shown here. You could also attach something to the top and make it almost like pendant lighting. I have these chargeable lights. I'll link these. They're from Amazon, but they are magnetic. So if you're using something that is metal, it will obviously stick to it. So same kind of deal here. If you want more of like a sconce moment, charge it, stick it on there, and attach it to your wall. Makes it look like it's hardwired, but it's not. Another thing I've been seeing for more like outdoor entertaining are these really cute solar lights. And I wanted to find something that I could maybe turn into a solar light. So I found two of these at the Hartville thrift shop for just $1 each. And all I'm going to do is from the Dollar General. The ones from the Dollar Tree were too big. So the ones from Dollar General are a little bit smaller, but they're only $1. And I'm just going to take the top section of those solar lights off and just E6000 them to the inside of what I'm assuming would be kind of like a candle holder. It has been raining basically every day here in Ohio, so I was not able to have these displayed outside, but I'm very excited to use these for some summer entertaining. So kind of like the vases, when it comes to your large scale artwork pieces, just kind of keep that in your mind when you're at the thrift store. So then that way, you know, maybe it needs a modification of a different coat of paint, or maybe it just needs a floating frame. But there's so many ways to kind of modify pieces at the thrift store to make them feel very current and fresh. So this is the wall clock that I ended up finding at the Hartville thrift shop. And they had charged me $21.50 for it, but then I used my coupon card, so it was even a little bit cheaper than that. When I was like very much in my farmhouse era, I actually owned something that looked really similar to this and donated it eventually to the thrift store. So I have a different idea though. I think when you have something that looks like this, maybe a lot of you have this and you feel you've just kind of like outgrown that kind of farmhouse look. I think it's more or less what you put behind this clock that will have it swing either way. So like this clock painted in a matte black on like a shiplap wall, of course will read very farmhouse. But if you have something that's like an aged brass behind it, wood behind it, leather behind it, all of a sudden now it becomes more current, I feel, changes the direction of this wall art piece. So I loved this piece here from our house, but again, almost $500, a little bit over budget. So I went to Hobby Lobby, I went in their kind of leather fabric section. All of the fabric was 40% off. I ended up choosing this one. In hindsight, I kind of wish I would have picked the one above it, but we're just gonna roll with it. So this is the fabric that I ended up choosing, and it was just about $20 for all of this fabric, and I have so much left over. I went to the Dollar Tree and I grabbed 6 poster boards just so I would have kind of something to attach the fabric onto. I attached all of the boards with duct tape. Now, of course, you could use MDF and a circular saw if that's your preference. For me personally, I just wanted to keep this project in specific, very beginner DIY level, no power tools. I then realized I needed to make a section in the middle there so that way I would be able to kind of press the poster board inside, made sure that it fit well, and then I applied that poster board to our fabric so I knew how much I was going to need to remove. I cut the section out that I traced and applied a generous amount of Mod Podge to the poster board and attached the 2 pieces together. Nothing is really permanent here. If I'm ever in my farmhouse era again, I can just pull the leather off, but I think for now it brings it a little bit more up to date, gives it a more masculine feel, and I love the way this project turned out. But textiles are so much more than just your pillows and blankets. It's everything related to your dining situation, your bedding, even things that are upholstered. It is a big area in design. So when you find a textile that is of good quality, I always recommend buying it, even if you might not have a use for that specific item. For example, I found this huge curtain panel, but it was just one panel. It was from CB2 and it was just $3.74. Now, of course, I won't be using this as a curtain, but there are so many things I can do with this fabric, and I have so much of this fabric, I can make it into several different things. And one of the ways we're going to use some of that fabric is in my pantry. So I wanted to do just like a very easy mini makeover, and I started off by just taking some measurements, took everything out, painted the inside of the pantry. So at Lowe's, I had, this is the only plywood that was kind of straight, so I had them at Lowe's cut down plywood that would extend past the wire shelves, but then also be the exact dimensions I would need to place them on top of the wire shelves. And then I also got this, I believe it was a 1x2x6, I believe. And I'm just going to now take my pencil and just make a mark there, bring it over to my miter saw, so that way this could be kind of like the front piece that covers that front of the wire shelf. I attached those pieces first with wood glue and then went in with my nail gun, and then it was just time for paint. I used this cabinet paint by Magnolia. It was just in an off-white kind of creamy color. I repeated that until all of the shelves were covered except for the bottom, because I wanted to do this cutesy little trend, which is to make a little cafe curtain at the bottom. So taking the measurements that I used in the beginning, and I'm just going to apply that to my fabric, and I'm going to just give myself a little bit of excess for the hem. Now taking my fabric scissors, these ones work really well. They're from Singer, and I just made some very straight cuts to kind of divvy out what I was going to use for this entire curtain panel. I then grabbed my tension rod from Walmart and then slid my little cafe curtain through. And I think this is just so stinking cute. It's so like quaint. So behind this curtain here, I have just some snacks, Murph's dog food, a kitchen appliance, just to kind of conceal it, but it looks a lot more aesthetic this way. And I know people are gonna ask, it looks nice, but where'd the food go? So here's what I ended up doing with my leftovers of my 1x2x6s. I just made these kind of permanent dividers in my Lazy Susan, and it honestly kind of makes more sense. I don't know why I didn't even think of this sooner. And this is just one of those examples of just small tweaks along the way that just make such a big difference. I feel like since removing the door for the pantry, doing the shelves, it gave me more surface area to work with, and it looks so much nicer. But I still had so much of the fabric left over. So you guys know this table has been beat up by me and my kids. They stay home with me. We're always doing crafts and things on there. So I'm not really in a phase of life where I want to buy and invest in anything new, but I also don't want to see it all the time. So I thought this would be the perfect thing to make a tablecloth. And even after the tablecloth, I still had so much left over, so I decided to make a set of 4 matching napkins. So now's a good time for me to introduce you to someone that I absolutely love, and her name is Pat. And she's basically like a sewing wizard. So I had her do the tablecloth and the napkins because every time she does something, it looks like it literally came out of a factory. And not only that, she enjoys doing it, and she charges me basically nothing to do it. So I thought this was a good opportunity to save some of my time and give it to somebody who really knows what they're doing and can do it perfectly. So as you can see, we took one CB2 curtain panel and we turned it into a mini cafe curtain, a tablecloth, and a matching set of napkins for such an affordable price. So this first example is kind of like the kitchen version. Now let's do a kind of more bathroom version. So Waffle towels, Waffle shower curtains from Crate & Barrel can be quite costly. So I found this one at the thrift store. It's originally from Threshold, and I actually think it's really affordable even from Target. So if you want to like go the Target route, totally fine. I don't have a shower that is of this width. I have a stall shower. So what I did was I cut the curtain in half, and then from the second half, I removed the rings, and then I cut that half in half. So I'm going to add one of the halves to the bottom. So I have a super long, super tall shower curtain, and then I'm going to have 3 hand towels. Again, cut everything down, explained to Pat what I wanted. It's like it came out of a factory. It's like I bought them at a store. They look absolutely perfect. Next up, let's talk about decorative accents. So this is all of the stuff that you're gonna be styling with. Of course, they're super beautiful at Target and Magnolia, but you can still find really beautiful things at the thrift store. So for example, I found this really beautiful cutting board. I loved it because it literally matched my floors perfectly. Some of you guys might remember when I DIY'd that peg rail using that thrifted pegboard, and I'm always looking for things with handles and hooks to kind of style up on that space, and you can do so affordably by shopping secondhand. Also found this little woven caddy for $2.49. I actually like this one better than the one from Hearth & Hand because it complements my floors, I think, a little bit better. But I think that these are great if you are hosting in the summer, or also I use these all the time for my kids. We put our paper and our craft supplies in there. Right now I'm actually using this for my makeup though. I think it's just it looks way nicer than a makeup bag. I don't have to dump the whole makeup bag out, see what I have, put everything then back in the makeup bag. Everything is just readily available. I know it's there. Everything has like a different compartment, and it's one way to stay organized but on a budget. Same deal for those antique drawers that I found. I didn't use them for antique drawers. I used them for something else. So for one of the drawers, I flipped it upside down, added D-rings, and made a little entryway shelf because I couldn't find anything that was affordable enough for the scale that I needed for my very narrow entryway. And then with the other drawer, I removed the backing to it, and then I added a tension rod. Again, added D-rings to the back and used it in my bathroom as a kind of display shelf. And then for the backing that we took off, added 2 frosted hurricane vases from the Dollar Tree, connected those together with E6000, added some puck lights, and created this little wall art lighting moment in my space. Of course, they have really beautiful options for faux potted florals and plants in general, but they do come at a pretty hefty price tag. So for the last, I would say probably 2 months, every time I've been at the Goodwill bins, I'll make it a point to kind of really try to build a collection of florals that I think would look good together in a kind of faux potted situation. So the one from Home Goods or Marshalls was beautiful, but $79.99 is a little steep. Thought it would be maybe not the worst idea to kind of weigh the pieces separately so you guys can kind of see like about how much I spent. And I think it'd be good for me kind of too to kind of really get an idea like how much am I really even saving here. I found this bundle most recently at the Goodwill bins. Everything is $1.29 a pound for like housewares, clothes, all that kind of stuff. Glassware and books are separate, and so are like furniture items. So I've got my scale here. I don't even know if this will pick this up really, but we'll try. Not really picking it up. Let's try maybe a food scale. So after separating them, I have 4 of these total. Now, there's not like a tag on here that I can tell you guys how much or where they're from or anything like that. If I was to go out to, let's say, Hobby Lobby or Michael's and buy one of these, I feel like it would probably be like, I don't know, $12 to $15. And then of course you can use a coupon. But I think for all of these 4 florals, if I had gone to a big box store, would be at least $30. So the fact that I was at the bins and it was just a few bucks is a major savings. Another thing I found at the bins was this pot here. This is what we're going to be adding the florals to, as well as some Quikrete, just to make sure the floral arrangement stays in place. Now, glassware pieces, like I said, are weighed 49 cents a pound, I believe. So let's see how much this guy is. If you were gonna do a faux potted arrangement inside, I would recommend just using foam, so that way you would be able to reuse those florals in a different capacity. But again, because these will be going outside, I want them to be able to weather the storm. And so that is why I'm using something called Quikrete. And it's just basically a concrete mix. And you want it to be basically the consistency of like pancake batter, maybe a little bit thicker. Mix that and then go ahead and pop your florals after you've cut them down to the appropriate size. So then that way, you know, when it's outside raining or it's really windy, everything's just not going to blow away. Once that was settled, I brought our faux potted geraniums to my sister's house and just wanted to elevate them to, again, make them look that much more high-end and luxe. And you can use anything. This was just an empty can. I flipped it upside down, placed our geraniums on top of there. Again, once end of May comes around, she can of course use this for real geraniums, but for now, I think it brings in the spring season without breaking the bank. The last kind of furniture item I wanted to touch on was really beautiful log holders. I would really only recommend this if you have a covered patio, or if you know that you're going to be outside and it's not going to rain. You can kind of bring this down, put the logs there, you know, newspaper, fire starters, whatever you need. And I think it's just a really beautiful way to kind of display your logs. So this guy was $25, but then I got 20% off. Just needed a really good clean again. So I just cleaned it off and then placed some logs. I actually placed this inside in my bedroom near our fireplace. But let's say we are hosting and we're gonna have a bonfire, a cookout, whatever. I can always just take this downstairs, fill it up with logs, and it's just a beautiful way to display them, but on a budget. When it comes to artwork and wall decor, I think the best thing I can tell you guys is just do some dream shopping from stores that you love. Find a piece you love and then go to your thrift stores. So for example, I found this very random wooden leg and I decided this would make some really great kind of cube-like artwork. Taking my speed square, I'm just measuring out 1/2-inch sections and then taking it over to my miter saw, and I'm just going to cut those down. And I just repeated that process until the whole table leg was pretty much cut down in those little square sections. And then taking some scrap wood that I had in my stash, I'm just kind of arranging these square sections. I love a checker printed moment, but I wanted this one to be all kind of the same tone. So I just laid them out, and I thought it would look better if the pattern kind of stopped at the end and just kind of became more sparse. But before I add any trim pieces or any wood pieces on, I wanted to stain this board first just to make sure that it felt really nice and uniform. Grabbed some trim from my stash, cut it down with my miter saw at a 45-degree angle so they have mitered corners, and then used the biggest clamps that I could find in my garage and attached these with some wood glue and then secured them down with my brad nail gun. For stain, I used a stain that I don't usually use anymore because it usually pulls a bit too kind of like orangey for my floors, which have definitely more of like a grayish undertone. But I started out with Early American and I stained all of these pieces using a Ziploc bag, and then I just kind of shook them around in there, and then I also stained the board and the trim pieces that color as well, and I hated it. It was super like not what I had in my mind at all. It didn't look good with my floors, so I had to go back to the drawing board. To neutralize everything, I went in with this ultra matte camouflage spray paint. I believe it's in the color Khaki. Gave 2 applications to this wall art piece, let that dry, and then I decided I was going to just do good old faithful. You guys know I do this trick all the time because it works. So I decided to take some watered down antiquing wax and just apply that instead. To me, this looks so much better, so much more high-end. It looks so much better with my floors, and the only new thing I bought was that random wooden leg from the bins. I actually still have a lot of luck at the thrift store finding really great books, and I never spend more than $2.49 for any hardcover book. But if there's a book, I've been wanting this kinfolk book, especially as we're going into like our gardening season. In order to just make sure you're getting the best deal, I like to just do a quick little Google search and see what like Target or Amazon is selling that book for, and usually HomeGoods is the most affordable price point, especially when you compare it to anything from like Pottery Barn or Restoration Hardware. It's not even a comparison. But there is one kind of book category that is an absolute no for me. It's these like faux book stacks. We can do way better, and I'm going to show you how we can do better. So these book stacks are at least always $20 at HomeGoods. You can find these little book boxes at the Target Dollar Spot right now. They are $3 a piece, and you can just simply paint over these and then wrap whatever you want around them. I love the linen covered books from RH, but they again are insanely expensive. So I'm going to start off by just spray painting these with some chalk paint that I have on hand. Taking some scrap linen fabric, I'm going to wrap these book boxes around with this fabric. The only kind of like detail thing I really wanted to do was add strands of hot glue on the binding of the side there, just like the one from RH. I kind of wish I would have done more of those to make it look more similar, but I think that this is just a really easy way. Take some Mod Podge and just attach the linen covering to your book box, and I think it looks super similar, but so much more budget friendly. And if anybody is still here, I just want to say a major thank you to you guys for sticking around. I hope you left this video feeling encouraged and inspired to shop your secondhand stores, see what you can come up with to improve your space. You don't need to shop retail to have a beautiful space that you love. With all that being said, I hope everybody had an amazing holiday, an amazing week, and I will see you guys next Sunday. Bye for now.